For this experiment, you will have 3 test tubes. These test tubes should be labeled as either Chemex or Pyrex on the side, as these are borosilicate glasses which are resistant to melting and breakage. You should inspect the test tubes and be sure that they're clean and dry. So this one is wet and should not be used for this experiment. So if you don't have dry test tubes, check with your instructor and see what they ask you to do. Some of the test tubes may have a little bit of chipping around the lip. That's fine. But if there are any cracks or chips anywhere else in the test tube, that can cause it to break, and it should be disposed of. If it does not already have water in it, fill your crystallization dish about 3/4 to 7/8 full of water, so that you will have plenty of water for the displacement of the gas. You will need to weigh out the mixture of potassium chlorate and potassium chloride. So the percentage of the mixture is unknown to you, and that is what you're going to be determining here today. You are going to weigh this out into a weigh boat. Check to make sure that it is a clean weigh boat. Some people aren't very good about getting rid of their weigh paper or weigh boats when they are done using them, and sometimes you will find dirty materials near the balance. You are going to be weighing out approximately 0.15 grams. Your instructor will give you the exact range that you should be using. Remember that you can weigh out using a weigh boat a couple of different ways. I could weigh the weigh boat and then weigh the material and subtract the difference. I am going to tare the balance so that it reads 0 grams, and then I am going to add a small amount of the unknown mixture. Be sure to record all 4 decimal places in your notebook. It doesn't need to be exactly 0.1500 grams, but you do need to know exactly what it is. Once you have weighed out your material, you are going to pour it into your test tube, making sure to bend the weigh boat so that you create kind of a funnel, and tap it down to make sure that all of the powder is removed. Then check the sides to make sure that you don't have any of your powder sticking to the sides and that all of the powder is at the bottom. Finally, you are going to add a very small amount of manganese. The manganese oxide is going to serve as a catalyst. Catalysts are not used up in the reaction, so we only need a very small amount. Use the smaller of the spatulas. Don't mix up the spatulas between the 2 chemicals or you could contaminate them. And you're just going to get a tiny bit on the tip of the spatula. You don't need very much. And tap that into your test tube. And you can shake your test tube so that the mixture looks gray and evenly distributed. Be sure to return the caps to the bottles before you leave the weighing area and clean up any mess you may have made, including disposing of your weigh boat. You need to fill your tube with water so that the heated air does not affect too much the calculation. Start by inserting the bottom of the tube and snaking the tube around until everything is underneath the water. If you just dump the whole thing under the water, you're apt to get air bubbles. You can look at your tubing and check for air bubbles. I have a small air bubble here that one, because it's near the end, will go away once I attach my equipment. You will need to fill your eudiometer with water, but make sure that you leave room at the top. You can see I've got maybe 1.5 inches of air at the top. This way you will be able to read the initial reading and know how much of the gas you have collected. Cover the end of the UDometer with a thumb or finger so that the water doesn't leak out, then invert it. Attach it to the burette stand, letting go only when the mouth of the UDometer is below the level of the water. Now you're going to need to get the tube in there, so you may have to adjust the height once it is attached. This to me looks like this is a little bit too low. I don't think I can get the tube in, so I'm going to adjust this. Also make sure that you turn the numbers so that you can see them. Then without lifting the tube out of the water, making sure that it stays under the water the whole time, take the end of the tube that is not a stopper, so it's just the plastic tubing and nothing else, and push about 2 inches into the UDometer. And you will need to take an initial reading off of your UDometer. It may be helpful to have a white card or paper behind the UDometer so that you can better read the numbers. Remember to read at eye level and record this in your notebook. Now you're about ready to get started with your heating. You're going to need to attach the other end of the tube to your test tube. It will be helpful if you have one person who is doing the attachment and the other person having a paper towel that can dry off the rubber stoppers so that it doesn't get water into your mixture, as that water will vaporize and add more gas. We don't want to do that. Do this very close to the dish so that you take as little of the tubing out of the water as possible, meaning that you will introduce as little air as possible. Once the stopper is fairly dry, enter it into the test tube. Don't turn your test tube upside down or you'll lose your material. Secure the stopper in place, and then once that's secured, then you can move your test tube over to the clamp. Check the placement of your test tube. You want to make sure that you are heating at an angle. This provides the most surface area to be heating and is also the safest way to heat this. The top of the test tube should not be pointed at a person. We also want to make sure that we clamp near the top of the test tube so that the flames are not being directed at the clamp, as the plastic around the clamp may melt.
Begin with a cool flame by adjusting the oxygen to a lower setting. You may just see yellow in the flame. You may need to adjust the height of the gas as well. Then you can place the flame underneath the test tube, only at the bottom where the reaction mixture is.
You will initially get some bubbles from the heated gas that is displacing, but most of the gas that is moving over is coming from the reacting of the material. So as the reaction comes to completion, the amount of bubble formation will be slower and slower. After about a minute, you are going to move to a higher temperature setting to ensure that all of your material has reacted. To adjust the flame to a higher temperature setting, you are going to need to add more oxygen. You will do this by moving the barrel at the bottom. So you are going to turn this to the left to open it up. You will see little flashes of yellow or orange. That comes from the salts that have been deposited on the top of the burette through various means, and from the iron that is in there. You will probably need to turn up the gas as well. So in adjusting these two, you want to see an inner blue, light blue cone, and that light blue cone, the tip of it should come just to your test tube. Again, you're going to heat for about a minute, but if you continue to see bubble formation, continue to allow the heating to occur until there have been no new bubbles for at least 10 seconds. Once you have no new bubbles forming, turn off your Bunsen burner, both at the burner and at the gas source. You will again need to take a reading of the eudiometer. Make sure that you're reading it at eye level. So in most cases, you will need to bend down a little bit to make sure you are reading it properly. And you may need to adjust the eudiometer so that the clamp is not hindering your ability to read it. At this point, you will need to redo your equipment so that you can set up for a second and then a third trial. So you will want to refill the eudiometer so that you make sure that you don't go past the point where you can measure the amount of gas in there, remembering to leave about an inch at the top. Make sure that you fill the tube again with water, and be careful of touching the stopper and the test tube until they are cool enough to touch.
Your waste contains both the potassium chloride and the manganese 2 oxide. The manganese 2 oxide needs special treatment, so be sure that you place your waste in a container designated by your instructor.
Because your test tube will be wet from your cleaning it, you will need to use a clean and dry test tube for the next 2 trials.